It was terribly hard when my father died. He was the calm, strong presence. My mother was very intense and very unpredictable, emotional. And I adored my father. I made this image of my father being from my mother. My mother always just told, my mother put my father on a pedestal, and that's what I grew up with. And I always missed him. I actually tried to, in a childlike way, hang on to all the husbands and fathers of in our building and wherever, because I was in search of that feeling, that father figure. When I became older, I talked to my half-sisters more as an adult, and they rounded up my image of my father, which I really appreciate. He wasn't a saint, he didn't belong to a pedestal, but now to me he's a flesh and bone, still wonderful human being. Actually, it was my aunt who told me the day my father died that I have to take now care of my mother. And I understood that because my mother never recovered from the Holocaust and she was not emotionally together. She did a heroic job of making financially a living for us, but emotionally I was the one that had to keep her on track and keep her together and bring her back to reality and protect her from herself in many ways. And I was pretty young, I was 6 years old. And by the time I was 9 years old, I shopped, cooked, and managed the money that we had. So it wasn't a typical childhood in a way, but it wasn't that untypical in Hungary either, because, there were a lot of people terribly damaged by the war, Jews and non-Jews alike. And so many men died in the war, so many children were brought up by a single parent and struggling, like my best friend Etta. So I didn't feel that it was unique in a way, but I do wish sometimes I had a real childhood. I'm trying to have one now. Writing the book really helped me to put the jigsaw puzzles together of anti-Semitism in Hungary, because I didn't understand it, and not understanding it made it so much more frightening, because then it felt like it was all random, that the violence in both communism and the Holocaust was just kind of random, insane things. And writing the book, I did a lot of research, and not that I excuse it in the least bit, but at least I have a better understanding where it came from and how it's transmitted from parents to children, and how people have such a necessity of finding a scapegoat when things are difficult. Usually anti-Semitic periods, pogroms and controversies and attacks happened when things were difficult economically, otherwise, in the country where it was happening. And so writing the book helped me a lot and put it in perspective. When I went back 14 years later to Hungary for the first time, it was my first opportunity. I was in a situation with my job and everything that I could afford to go back. I always wanted to go back. I never got over at that point of my leaving. And because I had to leave and I never thought that I could go back, I mythologized everything, but I never was sure that it was real in a way. So the reason of my first trip was to see my family, my aunt and my half-sister and my friends who were still there then, and to see it for real, tangible, real. And it was interesting because of course everything was much smaller and the situation was much better. There was communism, but it was a much more relaxed communism than I grew up with. I couldn't believe that people were singing American songs. I mean, for that you would go to jail and disappear in the Hungary that I grew up in. But now it was free. This was in 1971. But only when I went back with Mary in 2002 did I go back to face some of my history as a Jew. With Mary was the first time I went to the synagogue. I never been in it. And with her support is that I started to even think about it and I mean I always thought about it, but to own it outward. To have the strength with someone's loving support to own it and to explore it and to be able to tell people, yes, I'm Jewish, not by religion, but by that mysterious thing which we don't understand, whether it's race, ethnic group, whatever you want to call it. We know it's part of our identity.